Hey there, and thanks for listening to the Adulting is Easy podcast, where we make adulting easier by making money easier. This is your host, Lauren, and I'm joined today by Katie, the founder and face of Money with Katie, a personal finance brand devoted to creating money content you'll actually want to read, listen to, and watch. You can find her on Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram at Money with Katie, online at www.moneywithkatie.com, and at the Money with Katie show, wherever you get your podcasts. Katie, thank you so much for joining me.
Hey, Lauren, I am so excited to be here.
I'm so excited too, and I'm so excited to meet you finally. So this episode is brought to you all by Steadily Landlord Insurance. Steadily covers many different kinds of properties: single family, multifamily, vacant, restorations, apartment buildings, condos, even manufactured homes. And of course, they also cover Airbnbs and VRBOs. If you rent property to others, support this podcast by clicking the link in the show notes and getting a quote right now, if you can safely do so. Our goal for today is to make adulting easier for listeners by discussing a personal finance topic, since managing money is a big part of adulting. So today, Katie, you and I are going to talk about comparing ourselves to others, especially our friends. Why do we do that?
I think it's one of the most natural parts of being a human being. You're naturally going to want to benchmark yourself against others. And I think in some ways, we learn to do this from a very young age, even in school. Like, you get a grade, and I think it's natural to say, oh, well, I got a B on the test. What did my friend get? Or, oh, this person said they didn't study and they did better than me. I think it's just a very natural way that we tend to want to gauge how well we're doing. So it's not that it's a bad thing necessarily. I think that it can sometimes be used as fuel or can sometimes be motivating. But I think when comparing yourselves to other people is kind of the only metric by which you are judging yourself, it can lead to some negative outcomes.
Yeah, you've talked and written a lot about this. What are some of those negative things that can come from that?
Yeah, I think especially in the financial realm, I almost think about it in two different ways. So I think about it from the standpoint of, okay, if I have a bunch of friends and none of them invest, none of them are really thinking about their money in a proactive or strategic way, well, if I'm kind of judging my own financial habits based on the people that I hang out with, I might be looking around at those few people going, I'm fine. Like, I'm doing fine. This is normal. It's normal not to have a plan. When in reality, the fact that I'm judging my own financial habits against that of the friends that I have likely chosen for reasons completely unrelated to their money management skills, statistically speaking, it's really just not a good comparison standard. So I think that that's one element of it, is that you're going to probably adopt unknowingly or unconsciously some of the habits of the people around you by comparing yourselves to them. But then on the other side of it, financially, I think the trap that we tend to fall into, and again, totally human, totally natural, and I do this too, is when we talk about things like keeping up with the Joneses. I think we imagine, like, oh, the people down the street from me that just got the cooler Buick, like, oh, I don't care what those people do. I don't need to keep up with the Joneses. But that's not really the Joneses. The Joneses are typically the couple that you're going to go out to dinner with every once in a while, or the gal that you went to college with that you maybe see periodically. And it's most often people that are in your social circle that you are engaging with on some level. And when we try to keep up with the Joneses, typically we're looking at what they're doing in their lives and going, oh my gosh, like, what's wrong with me? Why am I not doing that? You know, Stacy and Bill just went to Bora Bora for 2 weeks. We haven't been on a vacation in 6 months. Like, should we be going on a vacation? I can't afford to take 2 weeks off. I can't go to the Caribbean for 2 weeks. So I think it's that kind of spiral mentality that can sometimes put us in a position to where we are not necessarily spending money we don't have. Maybe we do have it, but regardless, spending money that we maybe would not have been spending otherwise, until we were influenced by that peer who over dinner we learned like, oh my God, they're doing these things that sound so cool, or like they just moved into a nicer house, like maybe we should live in a nicer house, we could probably afford a nicer house, right? Like I think everyone knows that spiral effect that tends to happen when you hang out with someone who you would consider kind of on the same level but are, superficially living like a cooler or a better or more exciting, more impressive life than you are, and just that financial pressure that we feel to keep up.
I think that's a really good point. I think in our minds, the Joneses are neighbors, or maybe they're two doors down and they're just like these theoretical people. You're
Right.
like, I would never subconsciously keep up with these neighbors, these acquaintances. But you make a
Yes.
really good point that it's actually people that are in your immediate circle that can become the Joneses.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it makes it tough too, right? Because you want to be happy for your friends. Like you don't want to be silently keeping score or trying to keep up with your friends. Like you don't want that to be your default reaction. But for many of us, that is kind of, it's like it takes an effort, right? Like in order to keep yourself from really falling into that trap, I think you have to kind of mentally reframe and be aware of the fact that that is just the natural human tendency. And so I think for me, one thing that has been very helpful, kind of bucket it into two different little takeaways here. On one hand, I think about my friends that I have felt envious of. Typically, these are the women who either took the leap and started their own businesses and kind of were living the life that I wanted to be living, where like you're your own boss and you can make your own hours and you're doing what you're passionate about and you're making good money doing it. Like I had friends that were doing those things, and I would often compare myself in a way where it led me to feeling like, well, something's wrong with me because I haven't figured out how to do that. And so I think in order to harness that envy and kind of use it as a guide, I tried to spin it such that it became more motivational. Like, okay, well, I have this friend that's doing this thing, that's making more money, or that's starting her own business, or that's going for this thing that I don't currently have the resources or courage to do. How can I kind of study her and see, okay, how did she make that happen? Like, what questions can I ask her? What can I learn from her? How can I kind of mirror the positives of this outcome that she's generating for herself and really learn from it? And the other piece that I think is important is remembering that even if these people are your friends, and maybe you're comparing yourself to people that are not your friends, maybe it's people online that you don't even know, I think it can be important to remember that unless another person had the exact same upbringing, had the exact same opportunities, the exact same disadvantages, hell, unless they have the exact same brain as you do, like it's actually statistically completely invalid to compare your outcomes to them, because you're in a completely different position, right? So for me, anytime I found myself kind of looking outside of myself to determine how well I was doing or trying to benchmark against other people, I found that it was really helpful to think back just on myself, like 2 to 3 years earlier, and think, okay, where was I 2 years ago? What was I doing? How much was I earning? Where was I working? Like, how fulfilled did I feel on a daily basis? And to really be like, wow, I've come a really long way. Like, look how far I've come in those 2 years. Look how much progress I've made. And the timeline is totally arbitrary. You can pick 6 months, you can pick 5 years, you can pick 10 years. But really, the only person that you can really statistically validly compare yourself to determine how you're doing now is yourself in the past.
And something that I'll add too is you don't really know how people are doing.
Mm-hmm.
So just because
Yeah.
somebody is going out to dinner and buying a bottle of wine and getting appetizers and two
Yeah.
entrees just because they want to
Apps
try
and
it and
zerts.
desserts, yeah, all of that, right? Just because they're doing that, you don't know if they can pay that credit card off at the end of the month. Number one.
Yep.
Number two, you also don't know how often they do this. If you are going out, once a week, maybe they've got kids, they do this once a month. You
Yeah.
really don't know. So try not to extrapolate that out and assume just because things on the surface look a certain way that they actually are. And that definitely applies to social media and knowing people online, like you said.
I think that's a really good point. I also think that we have a tendency, especially, I'm going to make an assumption that if someone listens to this podcast, they are probably either already financially responsible or trying to be. I think we extrapolate's the perfect word. We tend to project our own habits and our own kind of thresholds onto other people. So maybe I wouldn't feel comfortable buying, I'm going to make this up. I wouldn't feel comfortable buying a $50,000 car because I'm like, well, that's not really good use of my money. I don't think I make enough money to be able to comfortably afford a $50,000 car. So I might look at a friend who buys a $60,000 car and be like, oh my God, they must be doing so much better, because you're just assuming that like they're approaching that decision through the same framework. But to your point about maybe they really can't pay back the credit card, you have no idea like if that person that's buying the $60,000 car can actually afford it. Maybe they can, maybe they can't. But I think that's just a really, really good thing. I think it sounds obvious, but it's a really good reminder that like you just don't know what's going on underneath the surface. You don't know what's going on inside someone's checking account. And so even though it's super tempting to make assumptions, like they're usually not really founded in reality.
Absolutely. And you've done an excellent job. And we've talked about the financial impacts of this, right? If you
Thank
look
you.
around and the people next to you, around you, right? In one of the articles you wrote, I read, so maybe somebody buys a new house and they decorate it a certain way, but you're renting and your apartment looks awesome. You were super proud of it until you walked into that person's house, right?
Yeah.
That can cause you to maybe go buy a house or redecorate
Mm-hmm.
or spend money, but there's the mental side of it too. Can you talk about that impact?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think it's just regardless of the financial ramifications, whether it actually causes you to go out and spend money or not, or to, make a rash decision about, well, Brad and Lisa have a 3-bedroom home and we have a 2-bedroom apartment. So like we got to level up, even if I was totally cool with the 2-bedroom apartment before, even if you're not actually acting on any of those inclinations. I think it's just a recipe for unhappiness, because frankly, there is always going to be someone that's doing better than you are financially, whether actually or just like on the surface, superficially, whether they can afford it or not. You're always, no matter what level you ascend to, you're always going to know somebody, especially if you're like up leveling your circles as you're up leveling yourself. You're always going to be around someone who's doing better than you. So if, in order to feel happy and in order to feel proud and in order to feel fulfilled and content, you have to be the richest or the most successful person in every room that you're in, like A, you're going to find yourself in some rooms that you probably don't want to be in, but B, you're really going to have a tough time mentally with reconciling the fact that like, okay, I thought I was happy with how I was doing, but I'm not anymore. And I think that that's like, that is something that I grapple with all the time, especially in the personal finance kind of community where like everyone is earning a lot and everyone is buying assets left and right and everyone is really kind of like laser focused on their goals. Lauren, even you on Twitter, where you'll mention like, this investing in this made me a millionaire, real estate made me a multimillionaire, and I'll be sitting there like, oh, well, I'm only a regular millionaire. I'm not a multimillionaire. Like, what am I doing wrong? Should I be buying real estate like Lauren? Where like in reality, it's good to be around people that push you and motivate you and like make you want to be better. But there has to be some intrinsic pride that comes with the progress that you're making. And I think that I always have to check myself when I find myself comparing myself to others, because I know that it's probably going to lead nowhere positive mentally.
It's a balance, right? We hear
Mm-hmm.
I don't know who originally said it, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you can be maybe in a room, like you said, where you're the richest or you make the most money or whatever. But if you were in a different room, you would still be the same person, but you would have the
Mm-hmm.
least amount of money. You would make the least amount of money. You'd have the least amount of net worth, right? So there's this balancing act with comparing yourselves to others, but you're maybe not the best that you can be in those
Mm-hmm.
situations. So what are your thoughts on surrounding yourself with people that have the same money goals as you? And what does that mean about the people that are in your life that don't?
Yeah. Man, I think community is really, really important when you are trying to achieve big things, if only because it's going to connect you with the resources and the inspiration and just the knowledge from people that have done it before. If I'm trying to go get into short-term rentals, I'm not going to go ask my friend that has only ever stayed in an Airbnb. I'm going to call up Lauren and go, hey, I'm investing in short-term rentals in Florida. What do I need to know? So I think those connections can be super valuable. And I really can't say enough good things about them. That said, at the same time, I don't think everybody in your life that's worth your time has to be providing some opportunity to, we'll call it, level up. Like, I think if you have a friend and you love that friend because they just make you laugh and they're always a good time when you guys go out together, I think that is a perfectly good reason to keep that friend around. So I like that you hit on balance, because I do think that that's really important. Like, I think where the comment or where the instruction of like, oh, you're the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with, while that is true to an extent, I do think that the slippery slope there is taking friendships or taking relationships and almost making them too transactional, like thinking about your friendships in a super transactional way. I think that is dangerous. And I think that it can kind of suck the joy out of relationships. So, I mean, what do you think about that? Like, how do you approach this in your own life?
Well, let's say I'm the average of the 5 people I surround myself with. Wouldn't that mean I'd want some people who are maybe nicer than me, more empathetic than me, more philosophical than me, right? It can't just be about money, right? You need to surround
Yeah.
yourself with people that have all these different traits. That's how I
Mm-hmm.
think about it.
Yeah, I love that. I tend to agree too. I feel like I gravitate really to people that, like, when I think about my closest friends, typically they're the ones that are not really concerned about the same things that I'm concerned with about, I'm very career oriented, I'm very achievement oriented. Like, I love goals and I love, going bigger and bigger and bigger. And most of my friends actually are quite philosophical or quite spiritual or very, I call it woo woo, but kind of like, they're
Yep.
they're fitness instructors, they're meditation teachers, or they're getting their masters in like social anthropology, so they're like thinkers, right? And I have really good conversations with them and they keep me very grounded. So I agree. I think that I'm glad that you mentioned that, like, hey, there are more dimensions that you have to consider here than just like this one piece of the pie. But I mean, if you log on to FinTwit, that's probably what you're going to see the most of. Is like, oh, once you're 30, you shouldn't have friends that go out anymore. Once you're 30, you shouldn't have friends that do XYZ. It's like, it's kind of such a depressing way to think about like relationships.
Right. And maybe in those situations that worked for those particular individuals, maybe they needed to cut some people out. But that does, I think,
Mm-hmm.
making that carte blanche advice across the board
Yeah.
is, I don't know. It's hard, right? Twitter, you only get so many characters. Well,
Yeah.
you used to. Uh, so is there a healthy way then to make comparisons? If it's kind of a natural human thing to do,
Mm-hmm.
is there a healthy way to do it?
Yeah, it's funny because I think when I first started thinking about these types of things and being aware of them and writing about them, and typically when you start writing about things, you do have to think more deeply about it because you're forcing yourself to organize your thoughts. But initially, I felt like when I would stumble upon these very human tendencies like comparison or like lifestyle creep, these topics that are kind of ubiquitous in the personal finance and like personal development spaces, I initially was like, I gotta stamp it out. It's a problem. I gotta just nip it in the bud. You can't do it at all. Cold turkey, whatever. But I think as the years have gone on and as I've kind of wrestled with or grappled with these various human tendencies, I've come to realize in my own life that it's probably unlikely that I will ever be able to totally stamp it out. I'll probably never be able to not compare myself at least a little bit. I'll probably never be able to totally suppress any potential lifestyle creep in the future, whatever. And so when it comes to comparison and comparing in a healthy way, I think for me, it comes down to using envy as a guide. and trying to leverage it for good and trying to allow it to motivate me. So when I see somebody in my industry or in my field, whatever, who's really just crushing it, doing way better than I am, or is farther along in their journey, I usually try to approach it from two angles. Where the first is, I'll usually be like, hey, you can't, this isn't really that fair because they're 3 years further along, or like they've been going at this full time for longer, or XYZ. There's some other variable here that's not quite the same. But even if it is the same, I find that it's sometimes helpful to be like, okay, I can either get really down on myself about this and feel bad and throw a pity party, or I can be like, okay, clearly something they're doing is working. Like, what can I learn from them? Or like, wow, look at what they've unlocked. Like, look at this level of success with this that they've reached. I didn't even know that was possible. But now that I know it's possible, well, now I'm going to reach for it too. So I think that there's definitely a way to approach it from a more expansive mindset, but it does take work. I think it's something that, like, your natural inclination, until you've like really, really trained yourself to only see it that way. I think everyone's natural inclination is to kind of take it to that place of like, well, what's wrong with me? Like, what am I doing wrong? But I think if you can truly like wake up every day and face those types of emotions through that opposite lens and coming at it from the other side and being like, okay, well, maybe I'm not doing anything wrong, but maybe they're just doing something really right. And like, how can I learn from the way that they're approaching this and bring myself to the next level too? Because ultimately, I think it just comes down to growth. And I've been thinking about it a lot recently in the context of like a game, like just doing it for the love of the game. And like if someone else is playing the game better than you are, okay, well, maybe that just means like you can train a little bit differently, or like there's something about the way they're playing and their strategy that you can kind of like try on for yourself. So it sounds corny to say like trying to have a little bit more fun with it, but that's been really kind of crucial for me recently. As you know the workload is picked up and we're trying to do all these different things, and it's so easy, especially in the age of social media, where like everyone's metrics are blasted across there. It's like your name and then your relative rank on that platform of like how many people care what you have to say.
Yeah.
It's a very conducive environment for comparison. So anytime you have numbers or benchmarking so readily available, money, grades, followers, whatever, I think that kind of mindset shift has helped me a lot.
That's very well said. And something that has helped me too is the abundance mindset versus the
Mhm.
scarcity mindset. Just because you get 5,000 more followers doesn't mean I get 5,000 less,
Mhm.
right? First of
Mhm.
all, there's more people than that in the world, but also the same 5,000 people can follow both of us, for
Yeah.
example, on Twitter, right?
Yeah.
So that's something that when I was a kid, I think I had this idea that if they get something, that means I can't have it. And
Mhm.
money is in my experience, it's not like that. The other side of it too, which is very recent for me. I mean, I'm 33. It's for sure probably in the last 5 years where, let's say I saw somebody with a house that I really liked, right? I would start thinking about, I want that. And then it became envy. But then it started to become recently, how could I get that? What steps would I
Mm.
need to take to get that? And do I want
Mhm.
to do those steps? And if I
Yeah.
don't want to do those steps, then I actually don't want that thing. And that was very freeing for me as
I love
well.
that. There's a funny Morgan Housel quote about this where he talks about like the cool guy in the Ferrari or whatever. And he'll be like, most of us, we see somebody in a Ferrari, or, insert luxury status symbol here. He's like, and we think, wow, like if I could have that, I would be cool too. But he's like, but you notice you're never actually looking at the person being like, wow, that person is so cool. You're just immediately projecting yourself into it, being like, how cool would I look if I had that? So he's like, you kind of don't notice the fact that like you're not actually coming to any positive conclusions about the person. They're like a blank face in the car. uh you're just immediately thinking like, what if I had that car? So I think that that's also kind of funny. That always really stuck with me. And I still to this day think about it sometimes when I see somebody driving a really nice car where I'm like, wow, what would I look like in that car? And it's like, but dude, you're not even paying attention to the person who's driving it. You're just thinking about yourself, which is maybe the biggest takeaway of all, which is like, when you're comparing yourself to everybody else, it's I think in sometimes coming from a place of like, do I look bad because I haven't achieved that, or like, do I look worse now by comparison? But really, like, no one's thinking about you. Like, you're the only person who's thinking about you in that way. No one else is. They're worried about themselves.
Exactly. That was a big thing that I came to realize too. And I think everybody goes through that where, yeah, for the most part, people are thinking about themselves even more so now. They probably aren't looking. They're probably looking at their phone too.
Yeah.
It's like more than just thinking about it. They're not even looking.
Exactly.
Is there anything else, Katie, that you want to add before we wrap up?
I think it's a journey. Like, at the risk of sounding super, super cliche, I frequently find myself coming back to these same themes. Like, I'll feel like, oh wow, I haven't really felt jealous, or I haven't felt scarcity mindset in a while. And then some time will pass, it'll flare up again, and I'll be like, oh man, I thought I was over this. I thought that like I had moved on from this small-minded habit or whatever. But I do think that growth and life and progress, like, none of these things are linear, and that expectation that something like comparison, getting over such a human tendency, that you're ever going to be fully over it, you're ever going to fully defeat it. It's like, no, this is just something that like you're going to find ways to cope with and deal with and harness for good. But I think that expectation that, you know you're ever going to fully just move past it and it's going to be behind you in the rear view forever. I think that's an expectation that we have to release, because it, much like comparison itself, it kind of makes us feel worse, or like, we're not doing something the way we should be. So I think just remembering that, like, it is always going to be a journey, and you're always going to be, it's kind of what's the phrase? Journey, not the destination. Yeah, that's what I would say to wrap up.
Exactly. Yeah. And be kind to yourself when you slip.
Yeah. Lots of grace.
Yeah. So can you tell people how to get in touch with you?
Yes, absolutely. So on social, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, just Money with Katie, and then www.moneywithkatie.com. That's where I post blogs and have other resources and tools. And then the Money with Katie show, if you like podcasts, and that is wherever you get your podcasts: YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, you name it.
I will put all of that in the show notes. And everybody, you can follow me on Twitter at Adulting is Easy, Instagram at Adulting is Easy Real, YouTube at Adulting is Easy. You can email me at realadultingiseasy@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening, everybody. Hopefully, Katie and I have made adulting a little easier for you.